Welcome to WCAT. I'm Kiki Latimer, and I'm your host for the Catholic Bookworm. And I'm very happy to have with me here today with us Dr. Deborah Savage. Welcome, Deborah.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
And Deborah is part of we're going to be discussing chapter 1 of a book called Lived Experience and the Search for Truth, Revisiting Catholic Sexual Morality. So heavy-duty topic today.
Yeah.
Hopefully we can enlighten it. Deborah's chapter is called When the Starting Place is Lived Experience, the Pastoral and Therapeutic Implications of Pope St. John Paul II's Account of the Person.
Okay.
It's a wonderful article. I really enjoyed reading it.
Wow, you read the whole thing.
I
That's
read
impressive.
quarters of it, so it got easier as it went along. It
Oh,
began
good.
like a tough read at the beginning, but I loved it. How about you want to start us off with a prayer just to keep us on track?
Sure. I think it's wise to invoke the Blessed Virgin Mary. So remember, O most gracious Virgin Mary, that never was it known that anyone who fled to thy protection, implored thy help, or sought thy intercession was left unaided. Inspired by this confidence, we fly into thee, O Virgin of Virgins, our Mother. To thee do we come, before thee we stand, sinful and sorrowful. O Mother of the Word incarnate, despise not our petitions, but in thy mercy hear and answer us. Amen.
Thank you. So, why don't you start off by just telling us a little bit about yourself? You're a professor of theology.
Yes, right. Yeah. Well, I should probably admit I'm more of a philosopher than I am a theologian, in the sense that I really gravitate towards that investigation. And I wrote my dissertation on, it was a comparison of Bernard Lonergan and Carol Wojtyła on the self-transcending subject. And the more I read, I was familiar with John Paul II, of course. I was sort of a groupie at the time. But I hadn't really read a lot of his philosophy. And I was just astonished at how profound he is. And so I didn't entirely let go of Lonergan, but I gravitate more towards John Paul's or Wojtyła's account of the person. It's so profound. And I think it solves a lot of modern day problems. So I am basically a Wojtyła scholar. And I've written rather extensively on this particular topic because I think it's so essential to the context these days, has been for a while. I can say more about that when you want me to, but so I teach theology though at Franciscan, and my area is anthropology, theological and philosophical anthropology, following on his conviction that that's at the heart of everything, and of course it is. Yeah, I've been teaching for a long time, though I've only been at Franciscan. This is my 4th year.
Do you like it there?
Oh my gosh, it's like Catholic Disneyland. It really is. Yeah, I'm very happy to be here. I taught at a seminary for 13 years where I taught philosophy almost exclusively to the pre-theology men, right? And that was really wonderful. I loved it. I was the only woman on the faculty, and it was wonderful to be woman, mother to those men. But I had other research areas that were not part of their strategic priorities, if you will. My main research area is man and woman. And so, yeah, it could have worked, but
Yeah.
at Franciscan, I found a real home for all of it.
So you really, I mean, this book is sort of looking at, pastoral ways and and in therapy ways to deal with the issues that the culture is facing right now of, a sexual identity crisis and the gender ideology. How does that start with John Paul II? I mean, you're one
Oh,
of the
well,
first people I've known that's tackled. It looks like you tackled the acting person. Um,
Oh, yes. Yeah, I mean, I don't know why everyone seems to have so much trouble with it. To me, it's pretty straightforward, but I imagine it's just because I don't really understand it then or something. I just found it astonishing. I mean, but well, to get to your question though, um, so what I notice, and we want to talk more broadly about the place of lived experience and subjective personal experience
Mm.
in public discourse, because really, as I say in the book, in the intro to the book, which I also wrote, subjective personal experience, the language of lived experience, so called, is really the currency, the linguistic currency of our era. And we speak so much in terms of metaphysics and metaphysical arguments, especially with regard to the human person and humani vitae, the teaching of humani vitae, and so on. And all of that is really essential, but nobody's listening. We've been making those arguments since 1965. By now, everyone knows about Cartesian dualism. But what I see going on is that people are rejecting the fruits of right reason, if you will, saying it's irrelevant because my personal experience doesn't correspond to it.
And in a sense, by
So,
that you mean feelings. Our
yeah,
feelings
feelings.
don't
It's
correspond
yeah,
to.
my own subjective reality should take priority over doctrine. This is even in some of the documents of the church, particularly those coming out of the the synod, right? Um, and this is first principles is no longer the starting place for any kind of argument. In fact, the real attack underway in our culture, I would say, is on reason itself. So what's so important about John Paul II's work in this regard is that he has an account of the place lived experience places or plays in a full account of the person. And he doesn't, in order to really grasp how profoundly he treats that, you have to grasp his anthropology in general. It's really a combination of Thomas Aquinas's account, metaphysical account of the person, which describes the whole, if you will, man in the abstract. But then he says to us and to the church, to the tradition, to Boethius, who said the person is an individual substance of a rational nature. He basically is saying, look, people don't walk around all day thinking of themselves as an individual substance of a rational nature. You have to go more deeply into the experience of the person because he's the subject not only of existence, which is what Aquinas is talking about, but also of action. And so his experience of himself in act and the way he appropriates the moral truths of the faith or reality, found in reality, there's an interaction between those two things, but we have to understand that. We have to unpack that better. So he actually says lived experience is certainly one of the most important philosophical categories. Why? Because metaphysics, he says, is basically an intellectual exploitation of experience. To say that there's experience and then there's truth is just ridiculous.
Right.
They both have their root in the mind of man. So experience, the knowledge begins in the senses. And what we have to understand better is how man encounters reality and how does he grasp that through reason and the truths of the faith as well. I mean, all of that. But so it's really astonishing. And I could pause there. I have more to say, but you better make me stop.
Well, I'm just thinking, we have, especially when we're younger, I was thinking, especially, I mean, teenagers have such strong feelings. I mean, we have
Mm,
feelings obviously throughout our lived experience of our lives.
yes.
But I mean, when we look back on our lives, certainly when we're younger, hormones are raging and there's just extremely strong feelings.
Yes.
And you talk, and both you and John Paul II talk about how these feelings are unbidden. They just come on us.
Right.
anger, sexual urges, food, hunger, thirst,
Appetites.
appetites are just there. Um,
Hmm.
and the idea, which is totally, existent, non-existent at this point, is the idea of how do you rein those in?
Hmm.
How do you, one of the things that you bring out in this article is, the formation of the conscience
Hmm.
and how important that is. Like a lot of people think, well, a conscience is sort of like a little magical organ that knows right from wrong, but on some level it does of natural law, but for many things it has to be taught
Right.
right from wrong, and you have to be taught to rein in your emotions. Um, so when we live in a culture that doesn't teach that at all, I sort of one of my questions was like, where does a person even start
Hmm.
when, say, they're 20 years old and they've never even been taught the idea that your emotions are something that need to be reined in so that you can be happy.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, well, I would say friendly amendment. I don't think JP2 thinks of it as reining them in, but I mean, obviously that language is relevant. He's very clear. He's completely in agreement with Aquinas. If there's any Thomists out there that are wondering, he's a Thomist using phenomenological method.
Mm.
So he absolutely affirms Aquinas's understanding of the moral law and how it relates to the human person and act, and all of that. Um, that should be obvious from Veritatis Splendor. He's absolutely convinced of the existence of absolute moral norms. But you mentioned how these things come unbidden. He's asking us to recognize that those impulses come from the subconscious, really, or from the body. He describes two dynamisms that he calls intersect across the orbit of consciousness. Sounds like, right? He's got these really elaborate ways of describing things, but his anthropology really divides the subjectivity of the person into man acts and something happens in man, and you're describing the something happens in man part. So I'm walking along, I see a handsome young man, and I turn toward him without even thinking about it, right? This happens less and less the older I get, of course,
Right.
you know. But anything, yet another cookie or yet another glass of wine or whatever, there's a kind of automatism that's unfolds there. That those are things that are part of the something happens in man dimension of my being. The sexual urge in his account, in Love and Responsibility, is in that arena. There's nothing wrong with the sexual urge. It's very natural. It's an aspect of the natural law built into our very bodies. Where my freedom is implicated is right at the moment at which I choose. Here's the impulse. I see it happen. And at that moment, I have a decision to make as a rational being, not just an animal driven by instinct, but a person with intellect, will, and freedom who can choose whether or not to act on that urge. And so he talks about, should I go on just a little bit further? He
Please.
talks about, in his anthropology, there's basically three stages: self governance, self possession, and self determination. And the first step is to learn how to govern myself in my own development. The human person is absolutely ordered toward his own perfection. The practice of virtue is to help us make decisions freely that move us closer to our own perfection. Freedom does not mean I get to do whatever I want. That's license. It means I
License.
choose what's truly good for me freely with the help of conscience. And that conscience is formed, if you will, in this initial stage of self-governance where I learn to govern myself. Best place for that to take place is when I'm a child and my mother and father help me to master in a certain way, in a limited way, myself. No, you can't hit your sister. No, please don't throw that rock.
Mm.
Thereby introducing the child to the world of right and wrong. Yeah. And then if along the way, then I come to a point where I'm actually in possession of myself, where I choose freely. Yeah. And I choose the good freely because what's been formed is not only my will, but my intellect. And the task of the intellect is to recognize the good. And then in cooperation with the will to choose it. So let me just take a little aside and point out to the young people, especially in the audience, that you cannot make of yourself a gift to another unless you possess yourself. You can't give what you do not have. And so that's one of the reasons, there's many more, why human sexuality is something that unfolds in one's life, the exercise of it in that particular, in the marital act, etc. It cannot really be the gift that everyone seems to romanticize these days, unless I'm in possession of myself and have something to give the other person. And the best place for that to take place, of course, is in marriage, when I've fully committed myself to this other. Anyway,
I
so
mean, we
then,
had this generation or two generations now of very unhappy people. But what do you say to the person who says, no, you're wrong. Lust itself is a good. Fulfillment of lust is a good. And I don't, and they haven't made the connection between fulfilling all of this lust and the deep unhappiness and loneliness
yeah,
that they're feeling.
yeah,
They've just been brought up with this idea,
mhm,
if it, I mean, if it feels good, do it, right? I mean, that's
yeah,
been the slogan since 1960. If it
right,
feels good, do it.
right,
Um, and,
yeah,
that's their understanding of the good. So when
yeah,
you speak of the good and you say, the good of sexuality is within marriage, you're saying, no, it's sleeping with everybody and their brother,
right, yeah.
literally.
I could, I could tell you what I say. I say only animals have sex without thinking about it. And that's a fact. We have uh, lowered ourselves in many respects to the level of animal behavior. Um, Animals are driven by instinct. Their instincts lead them to the good for them. They can go by their instincts. Human persons cannot, because our instincts are not adequate for helping us to arrive at the good for ourselves. Really, we have to choose. That's that's what distinguishes us from the animal kingdom. And so I ask the students who might encounter, are you happy? Do you even know what happiness consists in? I might explain to them, I know you're doing that because you think it will make you happy.
It isn't making me happy.
Everyone wants to be happy. The question is, what are the choices that will lead you to that? And I think this is the problem. Evidence is all around us that this lifestyle, however it plays out, is simply not going to result in happiness. Look at all the wounded women walking around right now, angry, wounded women who are lonely, have feel used, are angry at that, or the men that no longer feel compelled to become someone. They just like to play video games and go play pool with their friends. I mean, human life is meant, as John Paul II would say, we're afraid of our own greatness. Yeah, it's really a tragedy. So I know these don't seem like adequate responses, but I say Catholics have to stand firm and say, no, 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 you got it wrong. You can't. It's physically impossible to change your gender. Just forget about that. It's not an option. And so your lived experience needs to be integrated into the whole of who you are. And
I
that
mean,
is,
we're beginning to see the unhappy stories of people who
oh,
have tried to change their gender, the
right, right,
unhappiness, the desire to
right,
try to change back.
right. Or the
That,
children of divorced parents. You know, the evidence is clear. This is the one of the reasons that we put the book together. It's a collection of essays. Um, is that it seems really obvious that no one's paying attention. People are turning away from the obvious data, reams and reams of it, that reveal that this lifestyle, these choices that we've made over the last 60 years are leading to the degradation of man, not to his happiness.
I mean, I was thinking as you were speaking of the idea that we're not animals, but we also have in this culture this whole movement towards saying animals are persons. People have now replaced grandchildren and children with
I
dogs
know.
or pets. I mean, you
Yeah.
now go and take your dog to have a picture with Santa, not your child. I mean, many of people I know, they have no children or grandchildren at this point. If they had children, they don't have grandchildren.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's just this breakdown of the family.
Right.
Um,
Right. And I would say that that's been a long time coming, actually, since the Protestant Reformation, you might say. But it's certainly accelerated since the introduction of the birth control pill in 65. And uh, we need to face that uh, the breakdown of the family really started with that, with Paul VI was absolutely prophetic. Because in that one decision, what he was telling us, don't be tricked. This may seem like freedom, but it's not. Let me tell you why. This is what will happen. And everything that he described in Humani Vitae has come true. Yeah. So I think I lost my train of thought a little bit. What was the exact question that
well, I
you
was just thinking, when you talk about freedom, I mean, the concept of freedom in this country is I can choose whatever I want.
That's right. Yeah.
There's not an understanding that freedom always has boundaries. If you're driving on Route 95 and you do whatever you want, you're going to get killed or kill
Right.
somebody. There's
Right.
got to be rules in order to be able to drive freely,
Right.
and to get where you're going.
Yeah, it's one of
Um,
the paradoxes of human life, isn't it?
hmm,
Freedom to those who obey. You're
right,
always obeying something,
right.
and you better be careful who or what it is you're obeying. So what I say to my students especially, which is easy to do at Franciscan because you don't get much argument, but I've been in plenty of situations where I have. And you say, um, what is it that you really want? This is the question that's missing from our culture. What is it that you really want? You've been tricked into thinking that your life is merely an accident, a random event with no meaning. But you know in your heart of hearts that that is not true, that you matter, and you are obeying someone or something in every action you take. Start asking that question because, Kiki, don't you agree? I imagine your listeners do. This is We're definitely fighting with principalities and powers here.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry to bring it up.
Yeah. No, it's certainly bigger than just human culture.
Absolutely. I mean, this is a playing out of the garden, Genesis 3 on steroids. Yeah. So, there's so much at stake. I say don't hold back. It's no We have to die on this hill. If you're waiting for the hill to die on, you better die on this one because without recognizing the dignity of man and woman and what they're made for, both now and in the end, we won't, Western civilization at least seems to be clearly under attack from
So
within.
a great deal of your article talks towards the end, especially at the beginning, and then turns about same-sex attraction.
Right.
Is, a big issue, even if it's a small percentage of people. It's still a lot of people
Yeah.
You know, that especially with our young people, every time I turn, it's like everybody's gay now. It's
Yeah.
like, oh my goodness. It's
Yeah.
not even a big deal anymore on some level because, you know, it used to be like, oh, I came out of the closet. And now it's like, well, of course you did. You know, everybody did. So we're, you know,
Yeah.
we're almost sick of it at this point.
Yes.
Um, but my question, I have a good friend who's gay, and he's struggled with it his whole life, and at this point he's as far as I know, he's a celibate Catholic. But he talked about, you know, I had these feelings growing up, and I didn't want them, but they wouldn't go away.
Mhm.
And then he was, you know, in a relationship for a long time, which
Mhm.
didn't end happily ever after. Um, so
Mhm.
he's talked a lot about how it didn't bring happiness.
Oh,
Um, but when someone has these feelings, so addressing people that, you know, don't want to have them but have them. And I was thinking this morning about how, you know, in many of the books that I've read and people I've interviewed over the last year, we've talked about the importance of sexual identity in its proper understanding and the idea that I'm a woman. I do everything I do as a woman. I do it as a mother or a daughter or a sister, an aunt, grandma.
spouse.
Everything I do, spouse, everything I do is as a woman. And part of that is my orientation properly to a man, my spouse, but also to men in general, that I'm a woman. If I go into a room and I'm the
Right.
only woman there, I know it, you know.
Yeah. And so do they.
I hope I look good, you know. So
Yeah.
there's
Is
there's
my
all
lipstick all right?
right, so this is
Yeah.
good. It's sticking up. And
Yeah.
and so on one level, I understand that we want to say, you know, you are not your sexual orientation. But
Right.
on another level, we want to say, but properly understood, you are in
Well,
every molecule. So
sure.
how would you talk about that balance
Yes.
between those two things?
That's a profound question, Kiki, I think, because I think we have reduced our the sexual nature of man to the sexual act. That's all we think about, right? Who can I sleep with? Is it okay? You know, I want to be able to sleep with everybody. I want to be like men. This is the one thing that this is the great tragedies. Women are now saying, "Oh, I see what freedom is. I should be able to follow the man into that same dungeon." Um, Here's what I think. I think we have completely underestimated what you just described, not sexual orientation so much as our sexual nature, that really it's central to who we are. And the way I have come to explain it in my writing to my students is we've forgotten about eros. Eros is not just about erotic love. Eros is actually ultimately, in the primary sense, a thirst for being. Okay, so Eros leads me to become who I'm meant to be as a woman or as a man. It's a desire. John Paul would say it's a desire for greatness really built into us. And I say we completely underestimated the significance of the centrality of who I am as a sexual being, understood as the place of human creativity, the moment where I, together with, in collaboration, cooperation with God, I become myself. I see a way to give my gifts to the world. I'm an open system, and I'm always taking in and giving. I'm giving and receiving all the time because I have this very different from animals. You know, animals don't receive the world. They don't pause and look at a sunset. We are very special in the order of creation. We are, Psalm 8 is right. It's naming a reality. And so here's the devil, the evil one, saying, "Oh, he knows exactly where to get us. He's encouraged us to reduce our understanding of our own selves to sexual orientation, and that's just or to the sexual act itself." So, just one last comment on this. John Paul II says in Love and Responsibility that the sexual act is man's participation in the transmission of existence. Now, existence is God's thing. So we are participating. God is present there because we don't create things. Only God creates things, brings something into existence. What an inexpressibly intimate moment that is then. And so when you approach the sexual act without the proper formation, without a full understanding, without the full commitment it calls for to the other, it's like I say, it's like grabbing a hold of an electrical line that's come loose during a storm. It's like flopping around in the street. You pick it up, there will be a short. You'll be electrocuted. And that's what we've done to ourselves. We've forgotten completely that the
I mean,
sexual
we're
act
such a
is
cult.
an expression, the fullest expression of who I am in that moment.
I mean, we're such a culture of death right now. I
Yes.
mean, you say grabbing that wire and we're going to be electrocuted. And you see people, I mean, embracing that grabbing of the wire. I mean, I saw a young woman on a social media photograph the other day, marching in a pro-choice march, and she was holding a sign that said, "I'd rather be a murderer than a mother."
Oh, if that
And
isn't diabolical, I
I
don't know
just
what
thought,
is.
there it is, there
Yeah,
it is. It's like, can
right.
it get any uglier than this?
No, I know.
You know,
Right.
and so what do you, where, I mean, the formation of conscience
Mm,
has just, not only is it not formed, it's diabolically formed.
mm,
It's not even that there's just no formation.
right.
It's really
Right. Yes. Yeah. People will
such
say
that a
for,
young person would carry a sign that says that.
oh
I
my
thought to
gosh,
myself, what about her mother?
oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to remember that line. That's just such clear evidence of who we're fighting with.
Right, right.
Yeah, I mean, you have to kind of be careful that you don't say it too loud because he knows, I think. I don't mean to get too mystical or crazy or something, but that you have to be careful or because it seems like I mean, I'm sure you've experienced it too, where you're trying to do something good and things don't work out right because there seems to be some force that you're working against. Sometimes it shows up in technology, but anyway.
Well,
Um,
I think even our hesitancy right here and now to talk about the diabolical is part
right.
of it.
His
People don't want
plan.
to, you don't want to hear about satanic forces, and you don't want to hear
No.
about the
Right.
demonic, and you don't want to
Mhm.
hear that there's a reality of evil,
Yes.
because people will think you're crazy.
No, that's right.
So, I
And
mean, even in that, it shows us that, that's what we've come to.
the work of the devil is right there. Just read the Screw Tape Letters. C.S. Lewis illuminates that. No, that's really true. Which is why I say that, and you just pointed out yourself, we have to name this, and be absolutely unafraid. One of the reasons I got interested in the question I'm pursuing in this article that's in the book, the pastoral and therapeutic implications of JP2 account, is that what I notice about Catholics is that we're afraid to talk to people who, like the transgender person who approaches us and wants to argue, or a child, or someone who claims to be gay, or any of those things, right? We're afraid to talk to them because we think by doing so, we're somehow affirming their choices. And what I want people to know is that JP2, John Paul, gives us a way to freely encounter the other, as Pope Francis would say, to accompany them without falling prey or without affirming uh, their choices, but simply trying to understand how they came to them by beginning, actually, ironically, with their experience. Yeah. So my other theologian, Bernard Lonergan, said that the level of understanding is basically when someone tries to make sense of their experience. Everything starts with experience or the senses. And understanding is where I'm trying to say, well, now what's really going on here? And often those folks have had experiences that they haven't simply misinterpreted. They haven't understood it in relation to the whole. They've arrived at judgment. I must be gay. I must be a woman in a man's body. Because they had these experiences that somehow they too quickly made a judgment about, right? So it's actually a part of the healing process to
Right.
ask them, when was the first time you had that experience? What was going on? Because the evidence is very clear, especially with the transgender movement, that it's either social contagion or it can be an experience that confuse them, or these days an adult who said, oh, if you're a boy and you like ballet, you must be a girl, right? So actually we don't do them a good service if we don't begin by asking them to tell us more. So in the book, there's a wonderful article by Jason Everett, who is telling the church we need to listen to those people, kids mostly, that are saying that they're transgender. Listen to them more and help them unpack the real meaning of their experiences, because they don't mean what they think.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, we had a grandson for a couple of years who, when he was very little, like 3, 4, all of a sudden he just wanted to, everything had to be pink. He wanted to wear girls' sparkly things. He wanted his nails painted glittery. And, so we were in like this short-term sort of panic, like what is going on here? And it was scary given the culture and, everything around us is this what we've been hearing about? But we all just kept quiet. We didn't like push him in any direction. We just
Yeah.
kind of like let's see how this plays out.
Yeah.
And so we didn't say, oh, maybe you're a girl, or maybe we need to start injecting you with hormones and
Yeah.
have your penis cut off. Let's sort of just like hold on here and see
Yeah.
what's going on. And what we learned over the next year, just listening, was that what this young boy loved was beauty. What he
Mhm.
loved was beauty. And he was very, very sensitive to the beautiful. And he had
Mhm.
picked up on the fact that girls wear prettier clothes than boys do. Girls get the sparkly pink tiara and the
Mhm.
boys get a baseball mitt, And he didn't like the baseball mitt. He wanted the sparkles. But it had nothing to do with thinking he was a girl. It had to do with beauty. And so he has over the years he has now fine-tuned his interest to the most expensive sneakers you can imagine.
Oh, yeah, of
And
course.
he
Yeah.
loves beauty. He still loves beauty.
Yeah.
But it had nothing to do with gender. It had to
Right.
do with something entirely different. And
Yeah.
I could see how, given that situation in a different family, the kid'd be a mess by now.
Oh, definitely.
And
Yeah.
he would
I think
have
that's
been
such a
pushed
good,
into all kinds of God only knows what.
right. We're doing it to our children. Yeah.
Right.
And the data is pretty clear on that, that 90%, 85% of the children that express those kinds of, um, that kind of confusion, excuse me, grow out of it.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think it's the same with same-sex attraction. I mean, everyone's told now, oh, it's cool to be gay and it's okay to be gay. And you have a gay feeling and you're just immediately like pushed in that direction. But I
Mhm.
can remember having same-sex attraction when I was a teenager, having girl crushes. We used to call it a girl crush. You didn't think anything of it. You got over it. You moved
Yeah.
on. Because
Yeah. I
nobody,
remember holding hands with my best friend
yeah,
in
and
grammar
nobody
school.
told you, oh, that means you're gay and therefore you don't like boys and therefore you should move into a gay lifestyle.
Yeah.
That wasn't, you were just told, you had a girl
Yeah.
crush and you
Yeah.
eventually you
Yeah.
didn't.
Yeah. This is
Um,
what gets to the next level, doesn't it? The family, the context within which you grow up. It's absolutely so essential to the child's welfare, well-being. If you're living with parents or you're involved in a culture or a community that is already under the sway of this ideology, you're sort of doomed, right? I'm going to have to stop for a second and cough.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. One second, I'm sure Sebastian can edit this out.
We'll find it. I'll have a sip while you're there.
I'm sorry. So, right. So, there's a wonderful book by Mary Eberstadt called Primal Screams, which I recommend to your audience, in which she argues that the identity crisis that we're seeing is really absolutely traceable to the breakdown of the family. Because now children really have no way to measure their own identity. We know this. We come to know ourselves through contact with the other. And if the other is feeding back to us, the fact that you love beauty can only mean you're a girl, does a number of things, twists a number of things, right? First of all, it's the same stereotype that they're deploring. Only girls like pink, only girls like ballet. So if you like ballet, you must be a girl, even that's just what? That's an inner contradiction. But it also it's describing a secondary sex characteristic, as they call it. This something I'm attracted to, and sorry, putting more weight on that secondary sex characteristic than it can handle. It doesn't say that you're a girl because you like ballet. Liking ballet is a human thing. Yeah, we're 98% the same DNA, which is why it shouldn't surprise anyone that boys like ballet and women want to be engineers. So you have to distinguish between human nature itself and what makes man and woman different. And there are things, but liking ballet is not definitive of someone's gender. That's crazy. So we can tell this is incoherent. And what I say is that hell is where nothing makes sense. And we're approaching that. Yeah.
You talk about toward the end insights that can guide pastoral care.
Yes.
Because there are people are seeking help
Yes.
because these horrible choices or lifestyles that were supposed to lead to happiness didn't.
Yeah.
And they've led to horrible unhappiness.
Yeah.
So they are seeking pastoral care from ministers, from therapists. And so this article that you've written is really important because you are giving guidance to people providing that care.
Yes.
And sometimes you don't know how to provide it. It's,
well, in a theoretical way, at least on the level of the abstract, in a sense, John Paul will say, those urges come from the man, and something happens in man dynamism, right? We all experience that appetites, urges that we would never even tell someone we had because they're embarrassing, that sort of thing. But only it's when we decide to act on them that we run into trouble. So the trick is, or not trick, but the process has to include helping the person bring those impulses into the light of day so they can be examined. And often, I would say, pastoral care is certainly essential, and it can add a lot to this. But quite often, the issue is more not at the level of the supernatural. It's a quirk in the nature. It's more at the natural level. And if you can find a good psychotherapist who understands and is a Catholic one, frankly, they can help the person, the child, or whoever, illuminate where these are coming from, because it's so often the case, the data is clear, so often the case, something happened. Yeah. Now, it can be social contagion. That's a real thing. I mean, we know this, right? But at the same time, it's not always that. Someone's gender dysphoria is an actual thing.
It's interesting that, what preceded this, 40 years ago was this body dysphoria, we call it bulimia or anorexia. Right. And so a person who's skinny as a rail looks into the mirror and sees a fat person.
Yeah.
And so they're convinced they're fat. And so they're, starving themselves to death. Yeah. And it would never cross our minds to say to that person, you're right, you're fat.
Right. Right. No, I know.
We would say, no, you need to get help. You're not fat. You're starving to death. You're going to die.
Yeah.
if you don't get help, you're going to be
Yeah.
at the very worst, you're going to be horribly unhappy in a
Yeah.
hospital,
Yeah.
on IV tubes. But we've done the exact opposite with with this gender
Yeah.
identity, where the
Yes. And I would
girl
say that
sees
that's
me and says
because,
I'm a boy.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, we're doing just the opposite with the gender problem.
That's right. And I think, not to make too much of this, I suppose, but that to me, that's an indication that it's diabolical. And the reason I say that is because the evil one, the serpent's been messing with us since the creation account, since Genesis 3, on that very thing. In Genesis 3, the man has lost touch with his role as steward of creation. He's going to seek to dominate, right? And woman is going to desire her husband even though she knows he's going to dominate her. I mean, so this whole thing is just really playing out in a way that reveals the centrality of the fact that we're male and female. He created them. That's no that's no throwaway line. I mean, so if you think about it, from the moment you're conceived, you're either a woman or a man. There's no more options. There are intersex conditions. They're very rare, and the condition, it mostly has to do with external genitalia. If you
But
if
not
you
not on
search
a DNA
further,
level. Yeah.
pardon?
But not on an intercellular level.
Right, right. The problem with this whole transgender movement and transgender surgeries is that it is physically, literally, biologically impossible for a man to become a woman. You could mess around with the external genitalia, I suppose, but you cannot replace a man's reproductive apparatus with a woman's. You can't replace the DNA. I'm a woman in every cell of my body. So,
I mean, we're seeing it play out in the sports arena right now.
oh,
Or,
yes,
I mean, transgender men are just taking over women's sports, winning
right.
every competition. It's a nightmare.
Yeah.
Um,
So it's an attack on women. And what I say is that when women lose their place, and we have, men lose theirs. Because, as Fulton Sheen said, you can tell about a culture from the way it reveres its women. Who was it that's supposed to put her foot on the head of the serpent? The woman, right? Yeah. And John Paul says the moral authority of women, which is formidable, comes from her instinctive, sometimes unconscious recognition that she is responsible for all of humanity. Why? Because she understands the gift of life in a way, is the guardian of it in a way that man isn't. Man is our protector, our provider. They deserve our gratitude for everything they've done throughout history. But woman is the guardian of the gift of life, in the sense that that gift takes root in her body. Alice von Hildebrand says she's actually touched, her very body is touched by God in a profound way. Men's too, but in another way, she's got the double whammy kind of. And we know that we're responsible for all of humanity. If there's a child crying anywhere, in the church, on a playground, the men are like, "Oh, he'll be fine." Moms are all over it. Yeah. So, we know this. And so that our fearlessness is meant to be put at the service of that, not at the service of this pursuit of individual fame, fortune, power. Aquinas says those things can never bear the burden of human happiness. Yeah. Right.
It's interesting. My gentleman friend who's gay had the interesting comment. He said women are the gatekeepers of sexuality.
Yes.
And he said when you have two men who are together in a relationship, he said there's no gatekeeper.
Right.
And so it's always, men could have sex anytime, anywhere. So he said it's
Yeah.
always about sexual pleasure because
Right.
nobody's a gatekeeper.
No, that's so
I was
profound.
fascinated by
Yeah.
that. You know,
No,
that's
I think
from,
that's
the
true.
inside point of view. He said, no,
Yeah.
women
Yeah.
have that position.
I'm sorry.
Women
See,
have that position of
yes,
being
I've written
guardian.
about this in which I say that the solution to our situation is for women to start saying no to men's sexual advances again. Because when we deny men, like in that regard, are especially in their younger years, really are driven by this appetite, right? And it's a desire for instant gratification that's very strong. So when a woman says no, I'm reserving that for the moment at which I have the full commitment of a man I love. Um, what does that do? The man knows that in order, it used to be this more or less, the man knows that in order to earn his bride, he has to make something of himself. And what we have now is, as I
Ugh.
said, wounded women and juvenile males. Generation after generation, we're about ready to launch another generation of juvenile males and wounded women, and none of them understand what's happened.
Right. These juvenile males, I mean, we know we have the society of young men, meaning young, like 30, 40, living at
Yeah,
home,
right.
not doing even their own laundry, not working, not having jobs, doing nothing.
No, that's right.
Um,
And it's
and
because
then
they've
and
done
they and wondering why they don't have a girlfriend. You
right. And the
know?
women are now all, I am woman, and I have this powerful job. I make tons of money. Where am I going to find a man that matches that? Well, we've destroyed them. We've destroyed them. It's the evidence is very clear. Men are divesting from family life. They're no longer interested in being fathers, even though that's really essentially who they are. And one particular anthropologist I read says that it started with the birth control pill because at that moment we made it woman's decision. We kind of locked man out of the reproductive act by, for example, a man doesn't know necessarily in those chance encounters, the hookup culture, whether or not the woman is contracepting. He doesn't know if he leaves her and they walk away from each other and he doesn't get her phone number, they never see each other again. He doesn't know if maybe he's a father, right? Or what she would have done with his child, aborted it, perhaps, most likely. So men no longer even have a place in the procreation of the species in that sense. What did we expect? Men are saying, okay, you don't like who I am, I'm toxic, whatever. I'm just going to go play pool with my friends.
And such unhappiness coming from all of this, such
Right.
loneliness and unhappiness. There was a book written about 40 years ago, and I'm trying to remember the name of the author who first sort of addressed this in the secular realm. It was called Sexual Suicide.
Yes, by George Gilmer, I think,
Yes,
or Golden or something. Yes, I have that book.
George Gilder, I believe.
George Gilder, yeah. He's written a
Excellent.
number of books that are
Yeah.
worth reading. Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes. That's what we've
He
done.
really talks about that idea of, once you give up the roles that we have innately have that are in our nature,
Yeah,
um, this is a result. Here we are,
yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah. So again, we have to really be clear what it is who our opponent is. And the only problem I have with all the people that are pushing back on the transgender thing via rational argument is that, and all those rational arguments are great. They need to be made, but in a certain way, we've accepted the terms of the debate set for us by our opponents. Transgender ideology is on its face incoherent.
right.
So I mentioned before we began, my main research area is man and woman, and I don't actually write about transgenderism or try to push back on that. It's clearly incoherent. What my argument is that what we need is a constructive, robust account of who man and woman is. One that is scientifically, philosophically, theologically grounded, considers the social science, the psychological data, the biology, the neuroscience. And I've written about, I'm a theologian, philosopher theologian, so I've written about this in that regard. But at Franciscan, we're starting an institute called the Institute for the Study of Man and Woman, and it's an interdisciplinary study. It'll have a degree of some kind associated with it, so that we can lay that groundwork. Because I'll just give one example. This won't take long to describe. A young man was on a podcast that someone sent me, and the podcast was asking him why he had decided not to transition. Why did you decide not to transition? And he said, well, the first thing that happened was I discovered Jesus Christ. So that was kind of a big deal. But the second thing was I heard a talk by Deborah Savage at Franciscan University on the subject of man and woman. I have a theory of the masculine genius. I haven't mentioned that. I believe there is one. I always get a laugh when I say that, but there is one.
Hidden somewhere.
It's just, yeah, obviously there is, but anyway, so he said, I've never heard man and woman described that way. And all I've done really is go back to Genesis and ask a few more questions. And I don't say that so that people think I'm so special. It's not at all. My point is that that was proof of my theory. My hypothesis is correct. We need to have something to offer them. We need to say, no. You can like ballet. If we just understood it, there's human, and then there's my particularity. And then beyond that is that I'm a woman particular. My particularity is as a woman. Those three things are what complicate or make it my own reality a little more complex.
Well, I think this is a good place. I mean, I was just thinking, we've had, 40 years of women's studies. And,
Right.
And I do think we have to say, okay, we want to get rid of that, but what do we replace it with? And we have to go towards something that's more reality.
No, that's right. You can't understand woman apart from man.
Yeah.
You can't. And it's just a fact. We're not a matched pair, but we're a pair. When woman is created out of Adam's rib, that is not just doesn't mean that, first of all, woman is not created second. She's created last and on the way up. Okay, just so everybody, let's be clear about that. But the Hebrew is ezer, which means divine aid. The helper is divine aid, but it's ezer kenegdo. Kenegdo is a preposition meaning in front of, in the spatial sense. So man and woman are actually face to face in the created order. But when woman is created out of Adam's rib, what that means is that their relationship is not merely external. It doesn't just happen in the marital act. If she had been created independently of man, then God would have had two separate creatures who occasionally come together. But the sacred author is trying to tell us that woman is created out of man. And in fact, in Hebraic anthropology, woman is prefigured in man. If you look at the Michelangelo painting of the Sistine Chapel, you look over to see behind God's head is woman. He's touching Adam, and woman is right there waiting. This is Hebraic anthropology, which almost no one ever treats. So the Semitic author, the divine sacred author, would have known this is what he was trying to tell us. It's so profoundly organic, our connection. It's not just in marriage. It's the fact that we are linked for all of eternity. Man and woman we're linked for all of eternity, and our mission is to create, as JP2 says, not only human families, but human history together. Yeah.
And it does start in really supporting families.
Yes.
Really, supporting families, encouraging them, encouraging marriage, encouraging children.
Yes.
It's very important because we don't have that in this society.
No, it's right. We're so we're poverty stricken.
Mm.
We've decided poverty is better than abundance. Yeah, or
I remember when
scarcity.
I came back from India in 2004, I have it in my book, Seeing God's Face. I mean, there were just so many children in India.
Yeah,
And I had never really thought about it. But when I came back after spending 3 weeks in India, I was literally stunned by the lack of children here and the lack of community and the lack of community life and family life. That there was just nobody anywhere here. If you look
yeah,
around, it's really,
yeah.
there's just,
And children are the meaning of life. They really are. You know, I have my own story on that, but I have one daughter. I wish we wanted six. That did not work out. But what I didn't know until Maddie was born was how that you could love someone that much. I
mm,
did not know that. I did not know that love grows, that it gets bigger and your heart gets bigger right along with it. And the perhaps the most important lesson was that a child actualizes potencies that the parents don't even know they have until children enter their lives. This is why children help us become actual adults. We finally grow up when we have children because that's what they're there, that's what they're for in a certain way, to help complete me, to help me become more fully a mother, more fully a father, not strictly in the biological sense, but in the sense of filling out my being. Yeah, really becoming a mother. Oh my gosh, what a gift.
mm.
Such a gift.
My
And
daughter, my daughter yesterday, she's almost 40 and she has 5 children. And the little one's almost 2 this coming week. But it was interesting. We weren't away for the weekend together with for soccer games with a couple of them. And on the way home yesterday, she made the statement, "I don't understand why people don't want to have children." She said, because it's like saying, she said, it's like saying, I don't want the full gamut of experience that's possible to me.
I'm done, God. I'm going to stop right here.
Yeah, I'm good. I'd
Yeah,
rather travel, just me, myself, and I, or
yeah,
my significant other.
yeah.
But the gamut of having children and that experience, like you're saying, it brings out love and a part of yourself you didn't
Oh,
even know was there.
well, that's absolutely, I was just astonished, or my husband, how did you know how to do that? And, you know,
Oh,
so yeah, there's a movement. This I don't want to, I'm sure we're nearing the end of our time, but there's a movement now of young women deciding to sterilize themselves in one way or the other because they've decided at the age of 19 that they don't want children. Yeah. And there was an interview with one of those young women published, I think, in the Atlantic a couple of years ago. And the interviewer asked the young woman, okay, so you decided you're not going to have any kids. What are you going to do with all that extra time? And this 19-year-old girl got upset with the interviewer and said, well, I'm only 19. How do I know what I'm going to want to do with that time? And what's wrong with that picture? You're only 19 and you've decided already you don't want children. Yeah, we've accepted. Everyone really should take another look at the screw tape letters because we've accepted so many lies. And
I
they're,
had a girlfriend who got married probably when she was about 25, 28, and she didn't want children, and her husband did not want children. And then 5 years later, she was like, I want a child. And he said, yeah, but we had already decided that we didn't want children. And she said, well, take it or leave it because I want a
yeah,
child.
yeah, yeah,
It
yeah,
was a deal breaker five
yeah,
years later. And this
yeah.
was a woman who felt she knew her heart and knew her
Mm-hmm.
mind,
Mm-hmm.
well educated, and but the desire to have a child, was suddenly there, and she didn't see that coming. And
Yes,
they did
no,
have a child. They had one.
good. Just
Um,
one. I
yeah,
think of
they
all those women that are going to approach their 70s and 80s.
alone.
Well, I mean, I include myself in this group who don't have any children at all. What a lonely existence that will be. And they've done it to themselves. Yeah.
Right. People, as you get older, I think you really start to realize how important family is and family
Yes,
connections,
yes,
and the friendships and significant others and all that come with it.
yeah.
I have 4 children and 13 grandchildren.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And luckily most of them live close by, and it's a great
Mm.
blessing. I
Yes,
mean,
of course. Yeah.
yeah, they drive me crazy. Yeah, they take up a lot of my
Yeah.
time, but there will never be a lonely moment in my
Yeah,
life,
no. And
you
I
know.
even in those irritations, even in the difficulties, there's an intimacy there that is irreplaceable.
An opportunity for growth and
Yeah.
character development and virtue.
Yeah. And sacrifice. I mean, I'm pretty sure getting to heaven requires a little suffering. You can't leave out the cross.
Right.
So marriage and family, what better school of love is there? You know? Yeah.
Is there anything, I know there's so much in your article and there's obviously so much in your understanding, but is there anything that we've missed that you'd really like to mention?
Well, for one thing, I've been trying to bring this up. There, one of the sections of the book has um, not really anecdotes or stories, not subjective accounts of something, but they're personal accounts of people who have found through their own lived experience that the church's teaching on the human person is really the only account that leads to real, authentic human happiness. Because the problem with this category of lived experience right now, I'm sorry to say, even and maybe most especially in the church, is that the sort of lived experience that's allowing people to make the claim that Catholic sexual morality is too difficult for the average person and it should just be completely changed. Let's just give in to the culture. That experience, that's the experience of people who dissent a priori from the church's teaching. So they're using throughout the culture the lived experience of people who obviously have what would be called in psychology comorbidities. And so, we wanted to provide accounts where we demonstrated that actually the opposite is true, that lived experience leads one to conclude that the church is right when it's properly understood and integrated into the whole of who one is. And there's two particular chapters I would highlight. One is from a man who struggled with a homosexual lifestyle, despaired of ever getting out of it, and found his way through the Catholic Church's teaching on all of that. And the other one is of a woman who was engaged in the lesbian lifestyle and has the same kind of story, different story, but the same story. So I want to stress it's not just subjective anecdotes or something. These are people who are scholars, many of them, myself included. I have an article there about my own experience of living through the sexual revolution, as I did. I saw it happen. And what I learned from that's what really brings me to make these arguments. Because I do think that letting go of the church's teaching on human sexuality is the final step in the battle that we're in. Yeah, the
I
marriage,
think
family, human sexuality. This is what's definitely under attack at both a natural and supernatural level in our culture, and we must not let that pass. Yeah, we must not let that go on. So
I think it's
that would be one
important
thing.
yeah, I
Sorry.
think it's important to tell people, if you think Catholic sexuality is difficult, well, yes, it is, but life is difficult. But
Yes.
try sexuality outside of Catholic morality and find
Mhm.
out how difficult that is.
Right.
That's going to be a lot more difficult.
Right. No, that's
Yes,
right.
it's difficult to be in a marriage, have sex with one person, have your children with one person, work at a marriage. That's really hard. But try
Mhm.
working at adultery and divorce and
That's a good point.
all the crap that follows all of that. Like try working that out and see how
Yeah.
difficult that
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because then you just look at people's lives, look at how difficult their
Yeah.
lives are outside of sexual morality. So yeah, life is hard. You just
Uh-huh.
kind of choose, do you want the easy hard or the really
Yeah.
hard?
Well, I would say too, my husband and I have been married 35 years, and there's something really wonderful about having gone through all that, like some kind of tornado that all of a sudden we popped out of, and sitting together on the porch, not very often, frankly, because we both work so hard, but and realizing we made it. It's joyful. So I would point that out. That's absolutely a fact that's really the best. That's the greatest. Yeah. But then also to say that this book is not merely an academic project, not for me, it shouldn't be for anyone, because we're in front of real issues in our culture. They're concrete, they're scary. We absolutely need to work together to arrive at some understanding of how we can push back, is the metaphysical arguments and the rational arguments, the data, all of those are necessary. But I would say that the language of lived experience is where we need another line of defense. One thing I say in the introduction, we need another line of defense. We need to take back the language of lived experience and make our own arguments. No, 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 you have that wrong, whoever. Lived experience actually shows, and I'm living witness of it, that the church is right. Yeah. And so, and then the last thing I'd want to say is that we have to bear witness to that truth in our very being. We need to show people that the virtuous life, it is what is, that's the thing that shows up. And that's what's most appealing. One of my favorite authors, Joseph Pieper, said that the only virtue you can read in a man's face is temperance. And that temperance is not just about eating in moderation or drinking in moderation. Temperance is ultimately a harmony in the body, where all my parts do their own work. They work together cooperatively, harmoniously, intellect and will govern the appetites. Everything's like a really fine German automobile. Everything working together. And I think that's really useful to think about. That how do I show up in the world? Because that's how the early Christians did it. They fought the same pagan culture really that we did. We are, with some added accelerants. But how did they civilize that culture, the Roman culture? They civilized it because you could tell, you knew they were Christians by their love, by the fruits. And then people are attracted to that and ask you maybe, what are you doing that's different? Maybe they don't ask that directly, but they're thinking it.
Right.
Yeah,
Because everyone wants to be happy. I mean,
yes,
that's the bottom line.
right.
I always say if you ask a 4-year-old or a 14-year-old or a 94-year-old, what do you want? Happiness is the bottom line. I want to be happy.
Right.
And
Yeah, the tradition says that's the only thing we have no choice about wanting. We can make all the choices we want, but what's driving us is the desire for happiness. And we have to really be sure we choose the things that are going to get us there ultimately.
We talk about looking for it in all the wrong places.
Yes, that's right.
We do.
Yeah, inadequate substitutes.
Do you have a copy of the book handy for people
I
to
do.
see?
It's kind of big, sorry.
Lived experience and the search for truth.
Yeah.
And it's available on Amazon
Yes, ma'am.
and
For $34.95.
and through En route Books.
En route books. Yep, that's right. Yes. Yeah.
Would you like to end us with a prayer?
I would love to. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
Well, thank you so much. And I remind myself always, we fight the battles, but the war was won on Calvary.
That's right.
But we are called to fight the battles, and in whatever big or small way that the Holy Spirit leads us personally to. So, I thank you for writing this and for interviewing today, and God
It's
bless
fun.
with it all. One day at a time.
Yes, that's right.
We are called to have hope, and
Yes,
under
yes, we
tough,
can't. I think
in a
despair
tough
is,
culture right
yeah,
now.
we cannot despair. No, Jesus, we already read the last chapter.
Right.
Yeah. Okay,
Thank you
Kiki.
so much.
Thank you. It was great.